Communication is the quiet power that decides who gets heard, who gets respected, and who gets remembered. The difference between a brilliant idea and an ignored idea often comes down to how it was communicated. You can have talent, knowledge, or ambition, but if you cannot express it clearly, confidently, and intelligently, the world may never notice it. The ability to speak smart is not a gift. It is a skill, and like any valuable skill, it can be learned, strengthened, and mastered. Every interaction in life is built on communication. When you ask for an opportunity, when you lead a team, when you negotiate a salary, when you connect with someone you care about, when you defend your boundaries, and even when you stay silent, you are communicating. The quality of your communication shapes the quality of your relationships, your reputation, your credibility, and eventually, your destiny. What makes communication powerful is not just the words you choose, but the psychology behind them. Humans respond to tone, presence, emotion, rhythm, clarity, and intent. They are influenced by how you make them feel, how you make them think, and how you make them see themselves. When you learn to speak smart, you don't just talk well, you influence outcomes. In this audiobook, we will explore the mental frameworks, emotional intelligence, and practical skills needed to communicate with clarity, confidence, and power. You will learn how to listen, to influence how to speak, to be understood, how to persuade without force, how to build trust quickly, how to handle conflict calmly, and how to lead conversations with presence and intention. Communication is a lifelong advantage. It compounds, it travels, and it opens doors that talent alone cannot. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Train your mind before you train your mouth. Communication does not start when you open your mouth. It starts much earlier in your mind. The words you speak are simply the surface layer of a deeper, internal process. If the thinking beneath the words is unclear, rushed, reactive, or scattered, the communication that follows will be the same. This is why some people feel misunderstood, even though they said a lot, and why some others say very little, yet convey tremendous clarity and power. It begins with how they think. Before words, there is perception. Before sentences, there is intention. Before expression, there is awareness. A strong communicator trains the mind, the way a craftsman sharpens his tools. A dull tool makes the work harder, slower, and more painful. A sharp tool makes the same task cleaner, faster, and more effective. The mind works the same way. If you don't take the time to sharpen it, you will struggle in conversations that require precision, presence, or influence. The first mental shift is clarity. Ask yourself, what am I really trying to communicate right now? Most people speak without ever asking that question. They rush to talk, rush to explain, rush to defend, rush to argue. But communication rewards those who pause, those who take a breath, those who organize their thoughts before organizing their words. When you know your intention, the words follow naturally. The second mental shift is emotional regulation. Communication becomes difficult when the mind is hijacked by emotion. Anxiety makes us over-explain. Ego makes us over-defend. Anger makes us over-attack. Fear makes us under-speak. If you cannot control your emotional state, your words will end up serving your emotions instead of serving your purpose. Great communicators don't eliminate emotion. They process it. They step back internally and ask what needs to be expressed and what needs to be managed. Another key aspect of mental training is perspective taking. Communication is never one-directional. It always involves the listener. Before you speak, consider how your message will land. How will it be heard? How will it be interpreted? How will it make the other person feel? The inexperienced communicator only focuses on what they want to say. The skilled communicator also considers what the other person is ready to hear. That small shift makes communication smoother, less hostile, and far more effective. There is also the matter of self-awareness. Many communication problems do not come from vocabulary, intelligence, or lack of knowledge. They come from blind spots. You might interrupt without noticing. You might speak too softly. You might explain too much. You might avoid eye contact. You might dominate the conversation. You might downplay your ideas. We all have patterns, and unless we examine them, those patterns control us. Training the mind for communication is not about perfection. It is about awareness. It is about slowing down internally so that your external expression becomes more intentional. When the mind is calm, the words are clearer. When the mind is focused, the message is stronger. When the mind is steady, the listener feels it. So, before you practice speaking techniques, before you try to persuade others, before you attempt to influence or lead, start with the internal environment. Train your mind to hold clarity. Train it to hold intention. Train it to manage emotion. Train it to observe patterns. Communication is not merely a skill of the mouth. It is a discipline of the mind. Master the mind first, and the words will follow. Chapter 2. Master the art of mental framing. Every conversation begins long before the first word is spoken. It begins with a frame, a mental context that shapes how meaning is received. Framing is the invisible architecture of communication. It determines whether your message lands as helpful or offensive, confident or insecure, respectful or dismissive, persuasive or pushy. People don't just respond to what you say. They respond to the frame through which they interpret it. This is why two people can deliver the same message and get completely different reactions. One gets resistance, the other gets agreement. Same information, different frame. Think of framing as the lens you give the other person to view your message through. When you approach a conversation from a defensive frame, everything becomes a threat. When you approach it from an offensive frame, everything becomes a competition. But when you approach it from a collaborative frame, the conversation becomes a shared problem-solving process. The goal is not to win. The goal is to align. Most communication fails because people don't consider the frame at all. They focus on the content, the facts, the arguments, the points, but ignore the psychological container that holds those points. For example, saying, "We need to talk already," frames the conversation as serious, heavy, or confrontational. The frame triggers anxiety before any actual content is shared. But opening with, "Can I share something with you that I think will help both of us?" instantly creates a collaborative frame. Same intention, different outcome. Framing also affects status and authority. When you ask permission for every sentence, soften every opinion, and over-explain every detail, you frame yourself as the lower status participant. When you dominate, interrupt, or bulldoze, you frame yourself as aggressive or insecure. Not strong, powerful communicators don't rely on force. They rely on the frame. They set the tone early. They make the conversation feel safe, constructive, and purposeful. People naturally follow that energy because clarity reduces tension. Another element of framing is expectation setting. People become defensive when they don't know what to expect. Unexpected criticism can feel like an attack. Unexpected requests can feel like demands. Unexpected changes can feel like threats. But when you set expectations up front, resistance drops. Imagine a manager saying, "I need to speak with you about something regarding your performance." That frame triggers fear, but saying, "I want to discuss how we can make your workload smoother and help you shine more on the team," creates a positive performance frame. Both conversations may lead to the same adjustments, but one makes the listener shrink, while the other makes them open and curious. Framing also matters in persuasion. Research shows that people rarely respond well to direct pressure, but they respond extremely well to alignment frames. An alignment frame sounds like, "Here's what you want. Here's what I want. Here's how both can happen." When people feel aligned, their mind doesn't activate its defensive shields. They don't feel manipulated, cornered, or judged. They feel respected and understood. And respect is a powerful tool of influence. Sometimes the best frame is a future frame. Here's what this will look like going forward. Future frames help people visualize outcomes. Other times, you need a benefit frame. Here's how this helps you. Benefit frames bypass resistance by speaking directly to incentives. And occasionally, you need a clarity frame. Here's what I'm saying, and here's what I'm not saying. This prevents misunderstandings and assumptions from hijacking the conversation. To master framing, you must also become aware of negative frames. A negative frame is one that makes the listener feel attacked, judged inferior, or trapped. Statements like, "Why do you always? You never. You should. You don't understand. You're wrong," trigger emotional defense. Once emotion takes over, logic becomes irrelevant. No amount of reasoning can save a conversation. Once the frame becomes adversarial, that's why skilled communicators reframe instead of escalate. For example, instead of saying, "You're not listening," you can say, "I want to make sure we both feel heard." Instead of saying, "You're wrong," you can say, "Let's look at this from another angle." Reframes shift the conversation from attack to collaboration, from blame, curiosity, from conflict, clarity. It feels subtle, but it changes everything. Framing also influences trust. When you use a frame of transparency, "Here's why I'm bringing this up," or "Here's what I'm hoping to achieve," you reduce uncertainty. Uncertainty is the enemy of trust. When people don't know your motives, they guess them, and people rarely guess generously. A transparent frame fills in the blanks, so the mind doesn't have to. There is one more advanced layer: self-framing. Self-framing is how you present yourself in conversations, not by boasting or signaling status, but by demonstrating competence, calmness, and intention. When you communicate from a frame of grounded confidence, people mirror it. When you communicate from a frame of scarcity, insecurity, or fear, people mirror that too. Humans are emotional tuning forks. They align with the loudest signal in the room. Mastering framing takes awareness, not talent. It takes intention, not force, and it begins before you speak, not after, when you choose the frame wisely. Communication stops being a battle of words and becomes a meeting of minds. The frame decides the game, and the one who sets it rarely loses. Chapter 3. Understand human biases and assumption gaps. Communication would be simple if people always interpreted information exactly as it was intended. But humans don't hear what was said. They hear what they think was said. They filter information through their experiences, insecurities, desires, fears, memories, and assumptions. This means that every message has two versions, the one you sent and the one the listener received, and those two versions are rarely identical. The gap between them is where misunderstanding, conflict, and confusion are born. To communicate powerfully, you have to understand that people don't respond to reality. They respond to their perception of reality. This is where human biases enter the picture. Biases are mental shortcuts the brain uses to process complex information quickly. They aren't flaws, they're survival mechanisms, but they affect communication deeply. For example, confirmation bias makes people selectively hear what supports their beliefs and ignore what doesn't. Negativity bias makes negative information feel louder and more threatening than positive information. Ego protection bias makes people reinterpret comments to protect their self-image, even if no harm was intended. You don't need to become a psychologist to understand biases. You just need to remember that the mind is constantly editing incoming information. When someone hears feedback, their mind might translate it as judgment. When someone hears a suggestion, their mind might translate it as criticism. When someone hears a request, their mind might translate it as pressure. The wise communicator anticipates these distortions instead of being surprised by them. Assumptions add another layer. Humans rarely ask for clarification. They guess, meaning to fill gaps quickly. They assume tone, assume intent, assume context, and assume subtext, especially when the relationship has an emotional history. If someone already believes you, criticize them. Even neutral comments may sound like critiques. If someone already trusts you, even sharp feedback may sound constructive. The listener's prior narrative modifies your current message. This is why misunderstandings escalate so fast. Conversations don't collapse because of facts. They collapse because of interpretation, and interpretation is shaped by bias. For example, imagine you tell a coworker, "We should finish this sooner, so we're not rushed later." You might intend helpful coordination. They might hear control. They might hear criticism. They might hear urgency. They might hear blame. They might hear pressure. 5 interpretations. Same sentence. The meaning is not in the words. It's in the mind of the listener. To navigate assumption gaps, you must adopt a mindset of clarity over cleverness. Communicators get into trouble when they assume that what is obvious to them is obvious to everyone else. But people do not share your inner context. They do not share your thought process. They do not share your emotional state. They do not share your private logic. If you don't make these things explicit, people will create their own version of them. Another factor that shapes interpretation is ego. Humans have an instinctive need to feel competent, respected, valued, and right. When communication threatens one of those needs, even unintentionally, the brain shifts into defensive mode. You can see it in body language: crossed arms, tense shoulders, short answers, raised voice, avoidance, sarcasm. Defensiveness is not always a sign of disagreement. Often, it's a sign that ego is trying to protect itself. Skilled communicators don't attack ego. They create conditions where ego does not feel at risk. Perspective taking is the tool that bridges assumption gaps. It doesn't mean agreeing with the other person. It means understanding how the world looks from their side of the table. When you see their perspective, you can adjust your delivery without abandoning your message. For example, instead of saying, "You're doing it wrong," you can say, "Want to try a different approach that might make this easier?" The content is similar, but the framing removes the threat to competence. The ego stays intact, so the mind stays open. Bias awareness also helps you avoid escalating small problems into big ones. For instance, negativity bias makes people pay more attention to what went wrong than what went right. If you provide only corrections, the listener may feel attacked, even if your intention was improvement. A simple adjustment, like acknowledging what worked before discussing improvements, can neutralize negativity bias and reduce resistance. People learn faster when they don't feel like they're losing status. There's a powerful principle here. Communication quality increases when interpretation effort decreases. The more the listener has to guess, infer, and decode, the more vulnerable the message becomes to bias, ego, and assumption. The less they have to guess, the cleaner the communication becomes. You can also use clarifying phrases to reduce assumption gaps. "Here's what I mean. Here's why I'm mentioning this. I'm sharing this to help, not criticize. I want to make sure we're on the same page." These small phrases create psychological safety. They manage interpretation proactively instead of reactively. Great communicators don't wait for misunderstandings. They prevent them ultimately. Mastering communication requires acknowledging a simple truth. Humans are meaning-making machines. They don't just hear words. They build stories around those words. Some stories empower the conversation. Some stories distort it. Your job is to guide the story the listener builds. And that begins by understanding the biases, assumptions, and internal narratives they bring to the table. When you honor the psychology of perception, your communication becomes not just clearer, but smarter, kinder, and far more effective. Chapter 4. Communicate with emotional precision. Every message you send carries two layers: the information you deliver and the emotion beneath it. People don't just absorb your words. They absorb how those words make them feel. Emotion is the silent partner of communication. It shapes tone, interpretation, memory, and reaction. But most people communicate emotionally by accident. Powerful communicators communicate emotionally by intention. They don't suppress emotion, and they don't unleash it recklessly. They direct it with precision. Emotional precision begins with emotional awareness. You cannot control what you cannot recognize. Many people enter conversations without realizing what emotional state they're carrying. They speak from irritation without noticing the irritation. They speak from anxiety without noticing the anxiety. They speak from insecurity without labeling it. When the emotion is invisible, it becomes uncontrollable. And when it is uncontrollable, It becomes the hidden author of your message. Emotional awareness is simply the ability to pause internally and ask, what am I feeling right now? And how do I want that feeling to shape my communication? Labeling the emotion changes the conversation. Neuroscience shows that when you name an emotion, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling defensive, I'm feeling pressured, the emotional intensity decreases because the brain shifts from reaction to observation. Observation creates distance, and distance gives you choice. You no longer speak from the emotion. You speak about the emotion. That difference is subtle but transformative. Emotional precision also requires recognizing the emotion of the listener. Humans rarely articulate how they truly feel during communication. They express emotions indirectly through tone, posture, speed, hesitation, avoidance, or defensiveness. A person saying, "I'm fine" with a closed posture and clipped words is not fine. A person nodding quickly may not be agreeing. They may be trying to escape discomfort. A person smiling through tension is not relaxed. They're hiding anxiety or frustration. Emotional cues are part of the communication, even when words deny them. To communicate with precision, you must respond to emotion, not just to language if someone is defensive. Pushing facts harder won't help. Their brain isn't in logic mode, it's in protect mode. The skilled communicator softens the emotional environment. Before continuing the logical argument, they might say, "I'm not trying to criticize you. I'm trying to make this easier for both of us." That small acknowledgement relaxes the protective instinct and reopens the listening channel. Another aspect of emotional precision is regulating your own emotional delivery. Emotion influences tone, and tone influences meaning. A sentence delivered with warmth invites cooperation. The same sentence delivered with tension triggers resistance. For example, "We need to talk" can feel threatening if spoken abruptly, but supportive if spoken calmly. "I disagree" can feel like an attack or an invitation depending on tone. "Let's fix this" can feel empowering or demanding. Emotion gives your words their texture. When you control your emotional texture, you control how your message lands. However, emotional precision does not mean being emotionless. It means being intentional. A message delivered with compassion can heal. A message delivered with confidence can inspire. A message delivered with calm authority can de-escalate conflict. A message delivered with enthusiasm can energize. Emotion is a powerful tool when expressed deliberately. The key is to choose the emotion that matches your goal, rather than letting whatever emotion you feel spill out unfiltered. Timing also plays a role. Emotions fluctuate throughout a conversation. If you address a sensitive issue the moment the other person is reactive, their emotional state becomes the filter for everything you say. In that moment, even good intentions can sound threatening. Emotional precision means waiting for the right emotional moment, when there is space, calmness, and psychological readiness. Sometimes the best emotional strategy is patience. Let the emotion settle before the message enters. Empathy is another core element. Empathy doesn't require agreeing with the other person. It requires understanding their emotional landscape. When you acknowledge emotion, "I see why that upset you. I understand why you felt pressured. I know this is difficult to talk about." You create a safe space. People relax when they feel seen, and when they relax, they listen better. Empathy is not weakness. It is influence. It converts emotional tension into emotional cooperation. Being emotionally precise also protects your own boundaries. If you communicate without emotional precision, you may overshare, overcommit, or overjustify. When you feel guilty, you over-explain. When you feel insecure, you soften your message too much. When you feel angry, you push your message too hard. Emotional precision keeps you grounded. What do I want to express? What do I not want this emotion to distort? It allows you to hold confidence without aggression, firmness without harshness, vulnerability without instability. Ultimately, emotional precision transforms communication from chaotic to intentional. It reduces misunderstandings, builds trust, and deepens connection. When people feel emotionally safe in your presence, they open up, they become honest, they become cooperative, they become engaged, and you, in turn, become someone who is easy to listen to, easy to trust, and easy to follow. Great communication is not about perfect words. It is about aligned emotion. When your emotion, your intention, and your message work together, people don't just hear you, they feel you. And that is when communication becomes powerful enough to influence, heal, persuade, and inspire. Chapter 5. Speak clearly, not cleverly. One of the biggest mistakes people make in communication is trying to sound impressive. Instead of trying to be understood, they use complex language, long sentences, and abstract explanations because they believe sounding smart will make them credible. But in reality, communication rewards clarity, not cleverness. People are drawn to what they can immediately grasp, not what they have to decode. When you make your listener work too hard to understand you, they stop trying, their attention shifts, their patience shrinks, and their interest fades. Clarity keeps their mind open. Complexity pushes it away. Clarity begins with simplicity, but simplicity does not mean shallow. The most intelligent communicators are the ones who can break down complex ideas into clean, digestible explanations without losing meaning. That requires more understanding, not less. Anyone can make something sound complicated. It takes real mastery to make it sound simple. Think of the great teachers you've had in your life. They didn't overwhelm you with jargon. They gave you language that made sense, language that stuck, language that guided you. To speak clearly, you must first think clearly. The mind that is tangled will produce tangled speech before you talk. Ask yourself, what is the point I'm trying to make? That question alone can save entire conversations from drowning in explanation. A single clear point is better than 5 scattered ones. When you refine your point, the listener can follow you. When you scatter your point, the listener gets lost in the fog. Another key to clarity is structure.